The fog over the Ardennes still hung low when a small group of German officers gathered inside an abandoned farmhouse. Outside, the distant echoes of artillery rolled through the hills, but inside the room, all attention was fixed on a single object lying on the table: a captured American K-Ration. Major Kuhn, the most senior among them, turned the small cardboard box in his hands. It was light, almost unimpressive. "So this is what their soldiers eat?" he muttered. The others leaned in. None of them had ever seen one before. American supply crates rarely survived intact on the front. He broke the seal. A faint smell of chocolate and roasted coffee filled the air, a smell none of them had sensed for months. Inside the box lay a collection of food items that made the officers fall silent. A tin of processed cheese, a packet of biscuits, a bar of high-energy chocolate, a small can of meat, chewing gum, instant coffee, sugar tablets, even cigarettes neatly wrapped in silver foil. "Their soldiers carry all this for one meal?" whispered Oberleutnant Weber, stunned. For a long moment nobody spoke. They all understood what it meant. Major Kuhn picked up the chocolate bar and read the calorie count printed on the wrapper. "This alone has more energy than what some of our men get in a day," he said quietly. His voice carried no bitterness, only exhaustion. Outside, the wind rattled the window shutters. Inside, the reality of the war settled like a weight in the room. Germany was fighting with dwindling supplies, starving troops, and a collapsing industry. Most soldiers on the eastern and western fronts lived on watery soups, black bread, and whatever local farms hadn't lost to winter or destruction. But this small American box was full of sugar, fat, protein, everything a frontline soldier needed to stay alert, strong, and confident. "It's a factory-made meal," Weber said, examining the neat packaging. "Look at this. Printed instructions, standardized portions. It's like something from a department store." Another officer added, "They can feed hundreds of thousands of men like this every day. How do we fight that?" It wasn't a question. It was a confession. Major Kuhn slowly closed the box, as if handling something sacred. "This war is no longer decided by tanks," he said. "It's decided by factories. Their industry, it dwarfs ours." Silence again. At last, Kuhn placed the K-Ration on the table and stepped back. "Gentlemen," he said, almost whispering, "if the enemy's lunch looks like this, then the war is already lost." No one disagreed. The distant thunder of American artillery grew louder. And for the first time, the officers did not think about strategy or maps or orders. They thought only of a cardboard box and the terrifying truth it revealed. By the winter of 1944, the contrast between the American and German armies could be tasted as clearly as it could be seen. Food, something so basic, so ordinary, had quietly become one of the most powerful weapons of the entire war. On one side of the front stood American soldiers, their pockets filled with K-Rations, chocolate bars, chewing gum, powdered coffee, canned meat, vitamin tablets, and sugar. Their supply convoys stretched for miles, flowing endlessly from factories across an ocean untouched by war. Every U.S. soldier, from the newest private to the most battle-hardened sergeant, marched with a full stomach. On the other side stood German troops, hungry, exhausted, and carrying meals that barely deserved to be called meals. In a forest trench near Aachen, a group of German infantrymen sat huddled around a pot of thin barley soup. The liquid barely covered the bottom. Bread was already gone. The last time they'd tasted meat was 3 days earlier, a can of horse meat divided among 9 men. They chewed slowly, trying to make each bite last, their stomachs aching more from emptiness than cold. "It's not war that will kill us," one soldier murmured. "It's the hunger." He wasn't wrong. Across the line, an American squad sat under a camouflaged net, heating water over a small stove. One soldier stirred instant coffee while another opened a can of pork loaf. Someone else tore open a chocolate bar, the smell instantly filling the air. They didn't eat like kings, but they ate like men who had fuel in their bodies, strength in their arms, and energy for a long fight. Sergeant Doyle, a veteran of North Africa, looked at the food spread out in front of his men and said, "This is why we win. You can't fight on an empty stomach." Meanwhile, German General Otto von Manschenfeld received daily reports of starvation among his troops. Entire companies were becoming weak, unable to march long distances. Soldiers fainted during maneuvers. Supply wagons, lacking fuel, couldn't reach the front. The Wehrmacht, once feared for its speed and discipline, was slowing down, not because of enemy fire, but because of empty bellies. Propaganda could not hide the truth. The German soldiers' ration, once respectable, had collapsed into desperation. In another captured farmhouse, German officers compared their own iron ration to the American K-Ration. Their ration contained a tiny piece of dried sausage, a few rock-hard biscuits, and sometimes, only sometimes, a small packet of ersatz coffee made from roasted barley. It provided barely enough calories for a child, let alone a soldier fighting in freezing mud. When German troops captured an American outpost during the Battle of the Bulge, many ignored the weapons and instead went straight for the supply crates. The discovery shocked them. Mountains of canned meals, chocolate, powdered eggs, coffee, even fruit bars. "This isn't an army," one soldier said. "This is a moving supermarket." War had become a contest of factories. America fed millions of men without struggle. Germany, surrounded, starving, and bombed day and night, could not even feed the soldiers already at the front. By 1945, the two diets had become symbols of two nations' fates. One army powered by abundance, the other slowly collapsing from hunger. Food had made the difference, and everyone on both sides knew it. By the winter of 1944, American soldiers on the Western Front had a joke. "We don't know where the Germans are, but our supply trucks probably do." It wasn't far from the truth. The front lines shifted every week, but the endless columns of olive-drab trucks, thousands of them, moved like a mechanical bloodstream, feeding an army stretched across half a continent. Private Sam Whitaker, a driver in the famed Red Ball Express, used to say that the real miracle of the war wasn't the tanks or the bombers. It was the fact that somewhere, someone had calculated that he would need exactly 5 gallons of fuel, 2 spare tires, and 1 crate of canned rations before the next dawn. "The Germans had their rockets," Sam joked, "and we had paperwork that could crush a Tiger tank." Yet the numbers behind those jokes were staggering. American factories were producing a new truck every 5 minutes, a new aircraft every hour, and mountains of ammunition that seemed to rise from the ground like steel crops. Entire cities transformed into manufacturing hives. If Detroit slept at all, no one noticed. One of the clearest examples came after the breakout from Normandy. Allied divisions were advancing faster than any planner expected. Good news, except that tanks drink fuel like thirsty dragons. When Patton's Third Army practically sprinted across France, the fuel problem hit hard. Patton didn't complain. He simply radioed back, "Send me gas, and I'll keep going until I run out of Germans." Washington responded with what Sam called the great industrial magic trick. Within a week, 3,000 trucks were reassigned, 2 new temporary depots were built, and supply ships were redirected mid-Atlantic. Soldiers watched in disbelief as convoys rolled in, headlights blacked out, engines rumbling through the night. 55-gallon drums were unloaded so fast they piled up like metal monuments. Behind all this were ordinary Americans. Factory workers, welders, machinists, farmers, and railroad crews, who never touched a battlefield but shaped the war's outcome all the same. In a steel mill in Pittsburgh, a woman named Margaret Torres operated a furnace that produced armor plates for Sherman tanks. She never met Sam or Patton or any soldier in Europe. But every time she pulled the lever that unleashed a blast of molten steel, she felt like she was pushing the front line a little farther forward. And she was right. By 1945, the U.S. military wasn't just fighting a war. It was feeding, clothing, fueling, arming, and moving the largest expeditionary force in human history. A single American division consumed more supplies per day than an entire German corps could dream of. As one Wehrmacht officer wrote in his diary, "We fight men, they fight with factories." For Sam, the war ended the same way it had unfolded, on the road. He remembered his last run, driving past endless rows of American equipment stacked for shipment home. Tanks, trucks, crates, and tools stretched farther than the eye could see. A final reminder of what had carried the Allies from the beaches of Normandy to victory. "It wasn't glamorous," he said years later, "but that's the power of industry. Wars are won by the people who can keep going." And America, no doubt, kept going. In the winter of 1942, Sergeant Daniel Brooks learned a cruel truth of war. You don't need bullets to break an army. Sometimes, hunger does the job faster. He served with the U.S. forces in the Philippines, where soldiers fought not only the Japanese but the slow, eating pressure of starvation. Food became more than fuel. It became hope, fear, and discipline all at once. Daniel remembered the day their supply ship was sunk. The explosion was far offshore, just a flash on the horizon, but its meaning traveled inland like a cold wind. Rations were cut in half within hours. Within days, men were boiling rice sack threads, scraping burnt crumbs from pans, stretching meals into memories. Meanwhile, the Japanese army used food differently. They weaponized hunger against resistance groups, withholding rice shipments from villages suspected of helping guerrillas. One captured officer later explained it simply: "Starving people don't fight, they surrender." It was brutal logic and brutally effective. But starvation also forged strange moments of defiance. One night, Daniel's unit raided an abandoned warehouse. They weren't looking for rifles or ammunition. They were looking for anything edible. Inside, under a tarp, they found dozens of sacks of sweet potatoes. Nothing fancy, just rough, dirt-covered tubers. But when the soldiers saw them, some actually cheered. One corporal cried. For 5 minutes, the war vanished, replaced by the simple miracle of food. Across the ocean, the Germans discovered another side of the same weapon. During the siege of Stalingrad, the Soviet command used well-supplied troops as psychological leverage. German prisoners were marched past Soviet kitchens where large cauldrons of cabbage soup boiled in the cold. The smell alone was enough to break some prisoners' resolve. One Wehrmacht survivor later wrote, "We had no more strength to resist. Hunger commanded us." Even in Europe, American forces understood how morale rose and fell with the contents of a mess tin. Before D-Day, commanders insisted on serving hot meals when possible, not because soldiers needed calories, they needed confidence. The night before the landings, troops lined up for hot steak and eggs. Some were too nervous to eat, but the message was clear: you're strong. You're ready. We've prepared for everything. Daniel never forgot what hunger did to men. It made tempers short, jokes flat, and marches endless. But it also revealed a deeper truth. Armies aren't just fed with food, they're fed with belief. When word spread that American submarines had broken through and supplies might arrive, the mood in camp shifted instantly. Nothing had changed physically. The same empty pots remained. But suddenly, soldiers stood straighter, talked louder, and fought harder. Years later, when Daniel told his grandson about the war, he didn't talk about battles or generals. He talked about a single boiled sweet potato, shared between 4 starving men on a dark night, and how that tiny, warm thing kept them from giving up. Because in war, food isn't just survival. It's a weapon, and sometimes, it's the only one you have left. In the final winter of 1944, deep inside the Hürtgen forest, a captured American K-Ration box passed through the hands of several exhausted German soldiers. It was small, flimsy, and unimpressive, brown cardboard, stamped with simple black letters. Yet for the men holding it, the box might as well have been a surrender document. Not theirs to the Americans, but Germany's to reality. The moment that box arrived, Lieutenant Karl Brenner already knew the situation was collapsing. His platoon had been living on half rations for weeks. Their bread was mostly sawdust. Their soup tasted like boiled leaves. They joked that the only thing that still had flavor was misery. But that day, when a prisoner was brought in carrying an unopened American ration, the joking stopped. Inside the K-Ration were things Brenner hadn't tasted in months. Canned cheese, biscuits, chocolate, gum, powdered coffee, even a small pack of cigarettes. Nothing luxurious, nothing extravagant, just practical food. Yet everything inside was fresh, clean, and factory perfect. It smelled like a world where life still made sense. The German soldiers stared at it in silence. One private whispered, "They eat like this? At the front?" For Brenner, the shock wasn't envy. It was clarity. He suddenly saw the war not as a battle of armies, but as a contest of nations' ability to sustain those armies. Germany had soldiers with courage. America had soldiers with calories. And in modern war, calories win. Later that night, Brenner sat by the dim glow of a dying fire, turning a small tin of American cheese in his hands. The simple label, "Cheese, Processed," felt like a message from another universe. He opened it carefully. The smell was mild, almost ordinary, but to starving men, it felt rich enough to be a banquet. They shared it in silence. No one spoke. No one needed to. One sergeant, normally defiant and fiery, stared at the empty tin and finally muttered, "If their lunch looks like this, what do their supply depots look like? What do their factories look like?" No one replied. The answer was obvious. Later in the war, after Brenner was captured, he was interrogated by an American officer. The officer asked him when he personally realized Germany could not win. Brenner didn't mention Stalingrad or Normandy or the Allied bombers. He simply said, "The moment I saw how your soldiers eat." That response surprised the Americans, but it was honest. Wars are lost not only by failed offensives or broken defenses, but by empty stomachs. When a nation cannot feed its men, their fate is sealed long before the shooting stops. Years later, telling his grandson about the war, Brenner didn't describe glory or strategy. He described that small K-Ration box. How light it felt, how heavy its meaning was. A symbol not of American wealth, but of German exhaustion. Proof that while German troops were still fighting with courage, the nation behind them had already fallen behind. And so, a humble lunchbox, simple cardboard filled with everyday food, became, for many German soldiers, the clearest sign that the war was already lost.